The case of Tamiflu, oseltamivir, is one of the clearest examples of how pharmaceutical marketing, selective data disclosure, and public fear can combine to generate immense profits from a drug whose real-world benefit was far more limited than originally claimed. Produced by Roche and heavily promoted as a critical defense against seasonal and pandemic influenza, Tamiflu was hailed as a breakthrough antiviral that could reduce complications, hospitalizations, and even deaths if taken early. These bold assertions led to widespread stockpiling by governments, prescriptions in high volumes to the public, and global policy shifts in pandemic preparedness. Yet behind the confident messaging lay a troubling reality. Key clinical trial data was never fully disclosed. Independent reviews later found the drug's benefits to be modest at best, and the entire response exposed the vulnerability of global health policy to commercial manipulation. When Tamiflu first entered the market in the early 2000s, it was positioned as a game-changer in flu treatment. The public was told that taking it within 48 hours of symptom onset would reduce the duration of illness by more than a day, lower the risk of complications like pneumonia, and help avoid hospitalization. But the drug's rise to fame came not from seasonal flu treatment alone, but from fears of a deadly influenza pandemic, first with H5N1, avian flu, and later H1N1, swine flu, in 2009. Governments, driven by public health urgency and alarmist modeling, began to stockpile Tamiflu in massive quantities. The United States, United Kingdom, Japan, and others spent billions of dollars preparing for worst-case scenarios, with Tamiflu front and center as the pharmaceutical shield against viral catastrophe. However, independent researchers began asking a crucial question: where was the evidence? Much of the data used to support these claims came from industry-sponsored trials that were never fully published or made available for scrutiny. Key studies submitted to regulatory agencies were not included in the public record, and attempts by academics and organizations like the Cochrane Collaboration to access the full dataset were met with resistance. Roche repeatedly delayed or denied access to full trial reports, citing commercial confidentiality and other excuses. These delays went on for years, even as countries continued to pour taxpayer money into stockpiles of the drug. When researchers finally gained access to the data, the findings were sobering. According to Cochrane's comprehensive review, Tamiflu shortened flu symptoms by only about 17 hours on average, far less than the more than a day reduction that had been widely promoted. There was no clear evidence it reduced hospitalizations, serious complications, or transmission of the virus. Furthermore, Tamiflu was associated with side effects, including nausea, vomiting, headaches, and in some cases, psychiatric symptoms like confusion or hallucinations, particularly in children. In short, the public had been sold a narrative of life-saving efficacy that was never conclusively supported by the underlying science. The profits, however, were very real. Roche reportedly earned over $18 billion from Tamiflu sales, largely thanks to government purchases. National health agencies and international bodies like the World Health Organization included Tamiflu in emergency pandemic response strategies, reinforcing the drug's legitimacy. Even after doubts about its efficacy began to surface, the sheer momentum of policy, fear, and political liability made it difficult for governments to backtrack. Having spent billions on a stockpile, admitting the drug may not work as advertised would have carried a heavy political cost. What makes the Tamiflu case particularly disturbing is how it exposed the fragility of the drug approval and public health recommendation process when confronted with incomplete or manipulated evidence. Regulators like the European Medicines Agency and the US FDA approved the drug based on limited and, in hindsight, selectively reported data. Public health agencies were forced to make policy decisions in the absence of full transparency, relying heavily on information supplied by the manufacturer itself. This created a feedback loop in which early claims, once enshrined in policy, were rarely reevaluated, even as skepticism grew. Unlike some medical scandals that involve direct harm or catastrophic failure, Tamiflu's legacy is defined more by wasted resources, misplaced trust, and a systemic vulnerability to hype. While the drug is not without some benefit, especially in early treatment of at-risk patients, it never lived up to its portrayal as a cornerstone of pandemic defense. Yet it was marketed and adopted as such, not because of overwhelming evidence, but because the urgency of public fear and the opacity of clinical data made scrutiny both inconvenient and politically risky. The broader lesson is troubling. Even in matters of global health security, where the stakes are enormous and decisions affect entire populations, commercial influence can shape outcomes in ways that are only later revealed to be deeply flawed. Tamiflu's inflated claims demonstrate how pharmaceutical companies can leverage a combination of partial truths, data opacity, and institutional urgency to drive global sales, all while avoiding clear accountability. And when the truth finally emerges, years later, buried in technical reviews and contested footnotes, it often arrives too late to prevent the misallocation of billions or the erosion of public confidence. In the end, Tamiflu did not need to be a scam or a placebo to mislead the world. It only needed to promise more than it could prove, shield its data just long enough, and insert itself into the machinery of public health planning. In doing so, it became a quiet symbol of how modern medicine, when fused with secrecy and profit, can drift from evidence-based practice towards something far more dangerous: policy made on hope, fear, and assumptions too profitable to challenge.